This story begins with a girl born and raised in the realm of Ford, where people live. Across from him in the forest is the animal kingdom, home to monsters. They have wolf's head, a body several times the size of a human's, and very sharp fangs and claws. After a global conflict over a decade ago, a struggle for territory has developed between kingdoms, and to this day, no man has attempted to enter the animal kingdom. People were afraid of them because once you get in, you can't get back out. The head of the animal kingdom decided to marry a girl from the Ford kingdom, and this girl was doomed to marry him. The thing is, they wanted to get rid of her, and if the kingdom would give her in marriage to a wolf, that way they would improve relations with the neighboring animal kingdom, because it was very important to them. So they were happy that this way they could please those monsters. So the girl didn't even have a choice. She was the only sinner in the kingdom, and for that, she was given this punishment. She was certainly a princess, but only in name. In fact, she was never happy and constantly endured being treated badly. The girl had already begun to imagine her future, but in her mind, it wasn't a good one. Because all she knew was that she'd have to marry a real monster, so she was sure that in time, he'd destroy her. It was time to head into the territory of the animal kingdom. The girl was terrified of what she would have to endure, but unfortunately, she had no other choice. When they arrived at their destination, she was immediately thrown out of the carriage and left all alone in the woods. As it was too dangerous to go any further, the man who brought her said she would go on her own, and after that, he just drove away and left her alone in this dangerous place, where at any moment she could be attacked by monsters. She was very frightened. She had not even an object or means with which she could protect herself. She thought about running away, but then she realized that it was impossible because there were monsters everywhere. The girl realized that she was all alone, and if anything happened, no one would help her. So the feeling of dread increased with every second, as suddenly she heard some sound, as if someone was approaching her. But since it was already evening outside, it was hard to see anything, which made it feel a lot scarier. When suddenly, she felt someone's presence near her, and she wasn't mistaken. A monster with red eyes ran up to her. But would her end come so soon? The sight of him almost made her faint, and he must have been a little hungry. And if that's true, she doesn't stand a chance against him. When suddenly, in the same second, he started running right at her. But at some point the girl was pushed, and she fell to the floor. She immediately thought it was another monster, and now, the girl was sure that at best, she had a few minutes to live. But apparently a real miracle happened, except the girl herself hasn't realized what happened yet. She was rescued by the ultimate monster of the animal kingdom. The girl had already changed with the fact that these monsters would destroy him in seconds. But it all happened so fast that she doesn't realize she's saved yet. But even that didn't relieve her of her fear. This monster looked even more intimidating, and not at all reassured by his act. It really looked like he was the boss, since he was several times larger than the monster that attacked her. After this situation, the girl didn't know how to react at all, for she was afraid to make even the slightest movement. And at that moment, the monster looked at her and wondered what the man was doing in this realm. From his gaze, it was very difficult to understand what to expect from him. After all, he is a monster, and around are real predators. But since she'd already resigned herself to the fact that someone was about to destroy her, she was just waiting in dread for that moment to come. And then he asked her how she got here and what she wanted, because there's no one here to welcome her. To which the girl replied that she had come at the invitation of the chief king of the beasts, and a few minutes ago, she had been left here all alone. But for some reason, he didn't even want to keep listening to her, so he asked her to stop. The girl didn't understand what she needed to do to not piss him off and have a normal conversation. It turns out that because the girl didn't introduce herself right away, he didn't recognize her. Then he introduced himself as the king of beasts, and said his name was Alfred Vilcasis. But that wasn't all. He said it was her future husband's name. When the girl realized that she was to marry him, and he was the one she had come here to see, it was very hard for her to believe it. She started looking around to calm down a bit. It was very hard for her to get used to the fact that she was now condemned to live with a monster. And we can only hope that it won't actually be that bad, for Alfred could be cruel to his future wife. Perhaps despite his appearance, a very good and caring husband. Before, though, they've done some truly horrible things to the realm where humans live. They had a very considerable advantage. They were much stronger, and one day, they burned down her home village, and now one of them was to be her husband. Meanwhile, the next morning came, and she had a dream, like when she was a kid. Her mom used to wake her up. Those were the most enjoyable times when she truly enjoyed her life. The girl misses her very much, because now she has no close people to love and protect her. Her mom died a long time ago, and sometimes she sees her in her dreams. And at some point, the girl woke up very abruptly. She was in tears because she still can't forget that horrible day when she lost her mom. Once again, the dream was so realistic. But when the girl woke up, she realized it wasn't real and her mom wasn't around. But when she looked around and realized she was in a strange place, she was very frightened. And she also saw some wolf. It wasn't the nicest thing she'd seen in her life since the dream. And she was obviously very scared, because she can't get used to being surrounded by monsters. The girl immediately tried to run away because she felt threatened, although in fact, it was just an assistant, who had no bad intentions, and the fact that she looks like a wolf is no surprise, because that's what everyone in this kingdom looks like. But the girl is also understandable, because she knows these monsters as the most dangerous creatures that once caused her mom to die, and it's no wonder she reacted this way. The only thing she came up with was to hide behind the bed and hope that she would stay alive, though for now, the girl wasn't sure about that. And when the assistant decided to go after her, she thought the girl just wanted to play hide and seek. While she was unconscious, they took her to the monster's castle. When the assistant realized that the girl was very much frightened of her, she decided to simply warn him that the king would soon be coming, and it would be necessary to greet him at the table at breakfast time. And after that, the assistant said that the girl was now the consort of the king, so she was obliged to show him respect, to which the girl was surprised. I mean, she still can't get used to having to be his wife, and since she envisioned her future a little differently, the first thing she thought of was to try to escape, though she had not considered the fact that she had no chance, for she was being closely watched and would not be allowed to escape. The she-wolf grabbed her arm at the same second and hinted that breakfast was going to be going the other way, and that she had run the wrong way, and afterwards said that the girl didn't quite have the right look, so something had to be done about it. First, I needed to freshen up a bit and get in the shower. The assistant asked if the girl could do it on her own or if she needed help, to which she replied that she could change her own clothes and didn't need any help. As she began to change her clothes, the woman saw how thin the gentleman's wife was. She had never seen such a thing before, so she gave her a little advice that she needed to tweak her diet a little bit and get a lot more meals in there. Then, it was time to pick out an outfit, but her assistant did it instead. She picked out the right dress and left her no choice. After that, she suggested a little softening of the skin, and for that she took a suitable cream. Surprisingly, the girls had been prepared for the arrival for a long time. There were lots of facial cosmetics, and much more. It was time to do her makeup, and apparently her assistant was trained to even do that. She applied powder and then added blush to enhance her complexion. Since the king was against bright makeup, they made it barely noticeable, but still it was necessary to emphasize her natural beauty. The girl began to have some strange thoughts, as if she were being prepared to be eaten, or to do something that might harm her, when suddenly the moment came and she had to go to breakfast with her husband, and it turns out he's been waiting for her for a long time. And as usual, it was very hard to tell from the look in his eyes what kind of mood he was in today. It seemed he had been waiting for his wife, but he was still glad she had finally arrived. The girl was beginning to imagine with horror how this meeting would end, because she didn't expect anything good to happen. Some moment, she noticed that the plates were empty, and there was not a single dish on the table. And what could she think, of course? That perhaps the main course, and in this situation it was not at all like a joke. Alfred motioned her to sit down, and asked if she was ready to start breakfast, to which the girl thought, do they really want to feed her and then stack her on that big plate of... Then he asked why she wasn't eating anything, but because there wasn't any food on the table yet, she didn't understand at all what was going on, and was very afraid that at some point he might get angry. Because of her terrible fear, she immediately began to scream and beg him not to eat her, for she was sure that was what he was going to do, to which he asked if she could really think that, and seriously believed he was capable of doing that to her. After that, Alfred laughed for some reason, for what she said was really funny, for if he had wanted to do it, it would have happened a long time ago. Every emotion he showed made her incredibly nervous, and made her think she'd done something wrong, and when he offered to sit a little closer to him and yet looked not at all kind, but rather the opposite, it really alerted her. It was clear from his gaze that he was in the mood for a serious conversation, though perhaps the girl was still not used to his appearance. So every time he thinks he has some bad intentions, or that some of their conversations will end badly or be their last. But as she had no right to refuse him, the girl at once complied with his request, and came right over so that he would not get angry unnecessarily. At last the cook came to them. He wanted to ask what their preferences would be, to which Alfred replied to have him prepare a portion for his wife, and preferably to do it as soon as possible. All this time, the girl was too tense, for she was near the monster, who was very hungry, and had not eaten anything up to this time. As suddenly he wanted to comfort her, for she looked as if she were preparing for her doom, and it was very evident in her face. So, he said, they don't eat people, and she might not think there was any danger to her anymore. And of course she felt so much better after hearing him say that. She really relaxed after hearing him say it in person. Now she can safely enjoy a delicious breakfast and not be afraid of anything. Plus, all that food looks insanely appetizing. She's having a hard time holding back, and she wants to try every dish. Then, Alfred began to talk on the subject of food, so that the girl might better understand what they usually ate and what his preferences were. It turns out they're eating pretty much the same food that people normally eat. It became clear judging by the dishes the cook brought. They were various salads, soups, breads, and many meat dishes. So she believed him, because she didn't think he had any sense to deceive her. Afterwards, Alfred told of a tradition, usually the head of the family himself serving and distributing the meals. So she has to get used to it and remember that this is how it should always be. When everything was ready, and he had distributed a portion to each of them, he wished them a pleasant appetite, and suggested that they eat before everything cooled down. All this information was really necessary for her, for from now on at least she was not afraid to be near him, and that she might become someone's breakfast. When she tasted this soup, it was incredibly delicious. The girl didn't expect that this kingdom knew how to cook delicious food. This she told her husband, who didn't even expect her to like anything. But for some reason, he tried to pretend he didn't care about it. So he replied that it was the most ordinary soup, and perhaps it seemed delicious to her because she was too hungry. When she was in the dungeon, usually ate only hard bread and cold yushka, which was unleavened and quite unappetizing. And when her husband found out, it was amazing to him that people could do that, and sometimes they can be much more violent than monsters. He could never even think about it, because he was sure the cruelest creatures were in the animal kingdom. But apparently he was wrong, because even in the animal kingdom there are those who are much kinder than some people. And that's just amazing. Even the wolves she was among were much more polite and caring than the people she had been with a few days before. After a delicious breakfast, they were brought dessert and flavored tea. And after that, Alfred suggested one option for her: to go to the bathroom because she hasn't done it since yesterday. After saying that, which was very strange, she again suggested that perhaps she was still in danger. What in his words could have seemed so suspicious to her? She began to have unexplainable thoughts that perhaps in this way they wanted to prepare her and then do what she feared so much. But Alfred merely reminded her that it was important to keep clean, especially as she was a girl, and it was very important to her. So it was best not to forget that. After breakfast, the girl was visited by her personal assistant to guide her to the right room, because she was not yet oriented in the palace and could get lost. It's still strange to her that there's no one around who looks even a little bit like a normal person. They all have ears, and each one is too much like a real monster, and even though she's starting to trust them a little more, she tries to remember that they're still monsters, and sooner or later, they can show their true character, and it could happen at any moment. And since she is in a palace where there are too many of these monsters, she has to try her best to make sure that they don't have the desire to destroy her. As it happened some time ago to many people, it was a very strong conflict, and as a result, the monsters prevailed. As usual in her room, the girl is only thinking about how she can escape from here, or come up with some plan to do so. She was sure that if she didn't do it now, she would forever be doomed to live with them and dream every day of surviving. Although her fear was not justified, because in fact she has never yet been treated with cruelty or anything like that. But on the contrary, as an assistant for example, does everything she can to make her comfortable. She had long ago prepared the bathroom for her so that the girl could relax and enjoy this moment. When the assistant opened the doors to this room, the girl had no idea how pleasant the atmosphere was, and that from now on, this room would be her favorite one. You really don't want to leave and you want to stay there forever. This place is sure to please any girl, because there was everything, thanks to which anyone can feel like a real princess. It was an incredibly beautiful room in shades of pink, with lots of fragrant flowers that gave an unforgettable atmosphere. And no wonder that the girl was simply delighted, because she had never seen such a beautiful place, which at the same time, prepared just for her. There were a lot of flowers in this room. They were pink roses, which immediately caught her attention. She asked the assistant why there are so many of them here, to which she replied that Alfred loves them very much. And not only roses, he likes many kinds of flowers, and that's why there are so many of them here. And it was very strange, for how could a monster like him love flowers, and yet have them in every room of his palace? Because he and roses, at first glance, it is something incompatible. It turns out that for him specially collected rose petals in large quantities, and then he enjoys their aroma, and very fond of touching them. This she certainly did not expect to hear, for Alfred did not seem the sort of man to admire rose petals. But that wasn't all. It turns out he prefers even tea and sweets to be rose-flavored, and as cheesy as that sounds, it's actually very important to him. Even though the atmosphere was so pleasant, the girl still remembered that most likely she had been put on makeup and fed today, in order to do something bad as a result. And you have to take a bath to get something like broth. She still has some obscure thoughts, and even at such times, she sees something terrible in it. For how could she think that anyone would want to make any broth? And that it took the preparation of a hot bath, because that's just too weird. When the assistant once again saw her frightened look, she tried to explain that there was nothing wrong with it. But so far, the girl didn't trust her, because right now, she was talking to a monster that had gotten a lot of people killed, and the memories from her childhood haven't gone anywhere, even though she has been tried many times to convince her that they eat regular food. She's still sure there will be a moment at some point in time, when she becomes breakfast, and the fact that the assistant insists on her taking a bath, even that seems suspicious to her. Though if you think back on everything that's been going on, there hasn't been a moment yet where she's been treated badly, or even looked at with bad intentions or thoughts to harm her. But at this point, she did remember that it was better not to pretend to be afraid of something, and not to do something that might make someone angry. Therefore, it is better still to listen to what she is offered, and for now, it is better not to take risks, and not to create unnecessary problems. After that, she went straight to the bathroom, which was incredibly beautiful, with lots of rose petals and an incredibly pleasant scent. It was truly one of the best moments she had had in years. She had enjoyed being there so much that she had even forgotten that there were any problems at all. She savored every moment of it and wished it would never end. And at one point, she even wanted to go underwater. Apparently, she really forgot all her fears and finally decided to enjoy the experience. She took the opportunity and reflected afterward that she wondered, in the animal kingdom, if she felt much better than where she had been before. As suddenly, the calm atmosphere suddenly disappeared. The girl heard someone's footsteps and realized that someone was approaching. But this was the worst possible moment. She certainly didn't think anyone would want to come into this room right now. It turned out to be Alfred. What did he want? Did he know what the girl was doing and had come now on purpose? She felt too awkward and didn't know how to react to what was happening, because it was all too sudden. Even the assistant hadn't expected that he might walk in at this point, so she told him it would be much better if he waited until the girl was free. She immediately reached out to grab a towel, but she seemed to have too little time for that, namely a few seconds, because he immediately started coming up to her and asking her if she liked everything. And at this point, she had to cover herself with a towel as quickly as possible so he wouldn't see anything. She wondered if they didn't knock before entering, or at least ask if someone was comfortable talking or not, especially at times like this. For instance now, the girl was quite unprepared to have anyone come into her room and talk to her, for she was busy. When he saw her trying to get out of the bathroom and reach for a towel, he warned that she could easily fall, so it was best to take her time. But does he really think that's the only problem, since he walked in on her unannounced, and wonders why she's surprised at that? But luckily he did decide to help her and she didn't fall. But even still, she continued to feel uncomfortable. Because she couldn't even hide behind a towel, it was a really awkward moment, and of course he couldn't pass up such an opportunity, and began to consider it for a long time. People like him have wool, so he doesn't really understand the features of the human body, and didn't think at all that this situation would work out, so he apologized for it. And afterward he said she might get cold, so she'd better get back in the bathtub, because it would be better that way. And of course, after he apologized, the situation improved a little. But when the girl saw his hand again, she was scared the second she saw it. Has she still not gotten used to who she is with in this palace? Apparently it will take too long for that to happen. She immediately began to imagine the most dreadful consequences, for she still thought that danger awaited her at any moment. The girl looked at his claws, and because of fear, immediately began to cry. She could no longer contain her emotions, and when he noticed it, Alfred didn't expect that she might still be afraid of it, so he decided to do something about it. He looked at his hand and made an unexpected decision that the girl doesn't even know about. But first, he decided to ask her if she was really that afraid of claws. But she couldn't even respond, so the stress had left her with no energy at all, when suddenly, she decided to tell him the one situation she still can't forget. Namely that many years ago, there was a horrible situation that left her mom dead. And all because of the monster that lives in this realm, and the fact that it's his fault that she's all alone. Now he could see why she was always afraid and frightened in his presence, as suddenly, she saw Alfred about to do something. But could this tale have made him angry? Even the assistant who was standing next to me didn't realize what was going on. He has a sudden change of heart, and he seems overly determined, but what is he going to do? The girl no longer seemed to doubt that she had made a big mistake, and it would be much better if she didn't tell him anything. But unfortunately, there's no turning back time, and what's done can't be undone. It's a really incredibly stressful situation, and at this point, the girl has already resigned herself to the fact that there's nothing she can do about it anymore. And on top of that, she can't even run away or defend herself in any way. Could this be the moment she had been dreading so much these past few days? She'd already started asking him to forgive her, and that she'd never say anything like that to him again. But it turns out that once again she had simply exaggerated her fear. For in fact, it was not at all what she had thought it was. She realized it not immediately. The girl opened her eyes, and noticed that she surprisingly felt no pain at all. She immediately looked at her assistant, who was too surprised, but from her reaction it was still incomprehensible. After that, she did realize what had happened, and once again she was convinced that being afraid and imagining something terrible was really pointless. Because as it turned out, even now he'd done something that would make the girl no longer fear him, and to make sure that he didn't mean to hurt her, but was instead trying to do his best to make her feel better. He decided to remove his claws, and the girl had already made up and believed that now all her assumptions and fears would turn out to be true. It turns out that no matter how scary he looks, he never actually had any bad intentions towards her. But so far she hasn't realized it. And thanks to situations like this, someday she will, and she'll stop imagining things that can't really be. Sometimes, she does feel ashamed that she's imagining him to be so much worse than he really is. But it's moments like this that make her realize he's not as bad as he seems. After that, the assistant decided to tell her that it was a very good thing he had done, and that she should be grateful to him for it, because he usually never does that. Which means that he really cares that she feels safe, and that he's never had any thoughts of hurting her. Claws are the pride of every monster. They're a sign of status and greatness, and the fact that he got rid of them for her means he loves her very much. When the assistant told about it, the girl couldn't even think that he decided to do it right away when he found out that his wife was afraid of him because of it. She was at the same time very pleased that he had done such a thing for her, but at the same time she felt guilty, because just a little while ago I was sure he was a very bad man who couldn't be trusted. Besides, he's only known her for a few days, but even still, he dares to do such a thing. And all just so she could finally start to trust him and be at ease in his presence. It turns out that he is capable of many things for the girl he loves, and even his assistant, who has known him for many years, did not know about it. Even she thought, at that moment, that Alfred did not like something. The girl had a very strong desire to apologize for every frightened look and every thought when she thought he might be cruel to her. All this time she was sure that she had definitely offended him, and Alfred felt unhappy that such a bad opinion was held of him. Now that he had done very well, Alfred hoped that there would be no trouble now too. The girl took the opportunity and immediately apologized for her behavior. She admitted her guilt, and realized that it was very ugly of her to do so. She was really sincere, and there were two reasons for that. One, she wanted to apologize, and two, she needed to make sure he didn't get angry in any way possible. Afterwards, he looked at her with a very kindly look, and asked her if she was not now afraid of the. I guess this noble act on his part will really affect their relationship, and it'll make things better. Maybe if he looked like a normal person instead of a monster, thanks to these actions, he would have fallen in love with a girl on the first day. But unfortunately, he's a real monster, and that makes it hard to make things better. Now, instead of a feeling of fear, she had a feeling of guilt. Now she wanted to be very grateful to him, though he had done a lot of good things besides that. What she hadn't noticed, but now it seems the girl has really reconsidered her attitude towards him, and from this day forward, things will be completely different. But even with such good moments, she still can't forget the very situation that got her mom killed. But not only her, there were a lot of people who lived on her street when she was very young and didn't understand why they were being punished like that. And for sure, if it wasn't for that situation, things would be very different, and there would be no problem in feeling safe. The girl just doesn't notice that it is her that he treats better than anyone else in his entire life, because he is usually known as a monster who is very cruel. And to her, he's a completely different person who doesn't know what evil and hate are. Now, the girl is starting to feel like she's not scared at all, and it seems like she's really starting to trust him. When Alfred saw that she had calmed down a little, he reminded her that he would never hurt her, and afterwards he promised that in time she would realize that she had been very much mistaken, and in his palace, she would know what happiness and the absence of fear were like. When suddenly he remembered that the girl might be cold, for after a hot bath it would not hurt to put on something warm. He suggested that if they kept talking, she might get sick. But apparently the girl completely forgot that she was covering herself with some towel, and her clothes are nowhere to be found. When suddenly her towel fell off, adding to the awkwardness. She felt too uncomfortable with her clothes off, and apparently Alfred didn't even think of turning away. He still continues to stare at her, and it's no wonder, no matter how much the girl tried to hide, it was pointless. Then he came even closer to her, and reminded her that he was her husband, and had the right to see her in any condition he pleased. So she doesn't have to be shy and uncomfortable, because sooner or later, she'll have to get used to it. But so far, it's been unacceptable to her. She's asked him not to approach her because at this point, she's not ready for it. Her reaction wasn't quite clear to him, because he thought that after he cut off his claws, she wouldn't be afraid of him anymore. But in this situation, that wasn't the case. Because it's different. The girl doesn't want him to look at her like that, and it's not about fear. To remedy this situation in some way, the assistant thought of something, and suggested that they take a short break. Alfred realized at once that it was really necessary, and that the assistant suggested it for a reason, because she saw the situation from the outside, and wanted to make the best of it. Of course he obeyed her, for he knew it was better, for if he refused, he would be too insistent, which might frighten his wife away, and he did not want that. Even though he didn't really want to go, he did what was right, and as he left, he looked at the girl with sad eyes. Afterwards, when he had gone, and the assistant and the girl were alone, it was much calmer, for the bathroom was not the best place to talk, and the girl was not in the right state of mind, so it was not as it could be. The assistant suggested that she finally continue to enjoy this moment, because now she was sure no one would interrupt her, and she had time to be alone. The woman asked her to relax in the warm water and immerse herself in it up to her shoulders, and if she suddenly got too hot, she could say so, and the assistant would fix it. Her main mission was for the girl to finally get used to her new life, and realize that everything here would be done to make her feel as comfortable as possible, and not feel bad emotions. After a while, she had already taken a bath. It was one of the best times she had had in a while. She was properly rested, and went to her room. She had a lot on her mind, of course, because it had not been a quiet day. She had a lot of stressful situations. But anyway, it was better than if she had stayed where she was living before. In the morning she was sure that she was doomed to a terrible fate, and would not live even a few days in the kingdom of beasts. But it turned out that even there it was much better and more pleasant to be there, and she was treated there much better than when she was among the people. She realized that all those moments when she felt fear and thought she was going to be destroyed, it was only because she had been told all along that these monsters were terrible creatures. But in fact, even some humans could be worse and more dangerous than the inhabitants of the Beast Kingdom. Much to her surprise, among the wolves, the girl feels much better than she had her whole life in the realm of humans. They turned out to be much more caring and polite than she thought they would be. But most of all, she was surprised that supposedly the most dangerous monster that exists in this world is capable of very good deeds for the girl, whom he loves very much, because for him it was not a problem to cut off the claws, which for people like him began really a great deal, is a great value to wolves, and to give that up is something unacceptable to many. And when she found out about it, she realized that he truly values her and would do anything for her sake. As suddenly, the girl once again heard someone approaching her room. She has no idea who it could be. Instead of resting, she is once again afraid of every step, for she still doesn't know everyone who lives in this palace, and isn't sure there isn't one left who has something against her. The sounds of those footsteps growing stronger by the second. Because of them, she began to imagine the worst possible consequences, and that it could possibly be dangerous. She was pretty sure this wasn't going to end well, because there were probably some people who weren't exactly happy to see her there. Or, for example, jealous that she became the wife of a king, which is what many people dream of becoming, and have been doing their best all their lives to do so. Because of the constant uncertainty and lack of stability, the girl constantly calms down and then starts to be afraid of something again, and this negatively affects her morale. And each time her fear steadily increased, as suddenly the footsteps she had heard disappeared at some point, and most likely this meant only one thing, that whoever was walking had stopped right outside her door. And maybe a few seconds later, at best, someone knocks on the door, at worst, walks in without permission. She was very curious as to who it could be. The girl froze in one position, and didn't even move to hear every rustle that was going on outside her door. She thought it would help her find out something, or understand who it could be, for who could be walking so late in the corridor of the palace? She did not understand the girl even started to think about the fact that suddenly, once she entered the monster world, she could be a part of it, and so her fate was predetermined, and it was a doom that could happen at any moment, and according to her speculation, it could be exactly that moment of She began to think that perhaps the king and her assistant were not the ones to attack her, but she's not sure that someone else doesn't have such intentions, because obviously there will be those who may treat her badly, even if they try to hide it. It's possible that someone already hates her for messing up someone's plans that involve her husband. She began to think what she would have to do if she were in danger, for at the moment she was sure that that was what would happen. But had she forgotten who her husband was, and that no one would dare to harm her? For that man would be punished very severely, and in the animal kingdom everything was so cruel that no one would take such a risk, no matter how much they wanted revenge on the girl. And apparently she's just needlessly starting to convince herself that there's some kind of danger. And yet, who would want to be walking down the hallway at this late hour instead of resting or just being in their room? But as it turned out, she was afraid for nothing after all, because whoever was walking down the hallway didn't even think about coming up to her room or going in to see her. The girl again mistakenly thought that among the many rooms, someone might have the urge to enter her room specifically, and that someone might need to talk to her at this hour, or something else. When she listened a little more closely, it was clear that no more sounds were being heard. And all this time, she could rest easy and not even think about the fact that once again someone was trying to find her or had bad intentions. After that, she finally put out the light, for it was no longer necessary. Then, the girl went to her bed, and as usual once again, convinced herself that it was really pointless to be afraid of anything. But can't she still realize that nothing bad is going to happen to her, and that there are those who will protect her anyway, and no one will dare to do anything bad to her? The girl tried to calm down a little and finally sleep, but it did not succeed. She began to think about tomorrow, and horrified imagined the worst of it. It's not normal anymore. She's making up bad consequences that just can't happen. She never got to sleep, and when morning came, her assistant came to her and told her that today's breakfast would be fish and milk. As it turns out, the girl has been awake for 5 days. But does she still not feel safe? But what does she need to do to fix it? The assistant had noticed for a long time that the girl looked too pale, but this time she decided to ask if she could help her in any way, because it was obvious that she needed help. To which the girl didn't want to answer honestly, so she replied that it was okay, but it was obvious from her look that she was just afraid to admit to something. As she suddenly fainted, and no wonder if the cause had been lack of sleep for several days. and thus her body itself had decided to resume its lack of rest. After a while, she finally woke up, but she was in another room. She hadn't realized what had happened yet, and she was very curious how much time had passed since then. Her husband was beside her. He was constantly monitoring her condition, and when she woke up, he immediately asked how she was feeling. But she couldn't answer him because she wanted to know what had happened and why she was in this room. As she could not say a single word, Alfred was very curious to know the cause of her fainting. But what would happen if he did learn the reason that the girl could not sleep for several days? But at this moment he knew perfectly well that something had been nagging her all this time and was very much alarming her. She had such a frightened look in her eyes that he had not been able to hide his real emotion. Alfred could not stand it, and decided to ask her directly if she could not tell him what had happened to her, and what had caused her to faint so suddenly, and yet so early in the morning. The girl immediately saw that he was losing his mood, because a few days after their first meeting, he had not succeeded in making her not afraid to be in his palace, and apparently it is really very frustrating for him, because all his efforts are not effective. He really looked very sad, and it's no wonder, because when one fails at something, after unsuccessful attempts, there is no inspiration and no mood to do anything else. Won't the girl at least try to do something to somehow fix this situation, or to give him hope that it's not that bad, and she can tell him what she's really thinking about? Suddenly, he asked her to go somewhere with him, whether he had a plan or just wanted to discuss something very important with her. And since she didn't understand the reason for this decision, it was very interesting to see what was in store for her. But in order not to aggravate and upset him, of course she agreed because refusing wasn't the best option. She just decided to follow him and began to imagine what he might be up to and what the purpose of it might be. Perhaps he would try again to do something to change her mind or affect her mood in some way. Isn't he still sick of the fact that in every situation, she's constantly afraid? And even when it doesn't make sense, she starts making up non-existent situations that end up not happening. Isn't she tired of the fact that even now, she is imagining the worst consequences that could happen? Because doesn't she want to just relax and trust her husband? Because in any situation, she won't be able to change anything. And even if she wants to run away somewhere, and even if she succeeds, she has nowhere to go. And if she returns to the realm of men, she will find herself in the very place where she spent the worst years of her life. The girl began to imagine that if she tried to tell him again that she was scared, he would just take her to a place like this to think about her behavior. In the meantime, they seemed to have arrived at their destination, but she had never been here before, and had no idea what awaited her, or what they had come here for. Alfred said that they were already at the place, and after that the girl began to hope that something bad was not waiting for her there, but on the contrary, that they would have a good time. When he started to open the door, the girl felt some kind of pleasant atmosphere. Even at that moment, while she hadn't entered yet, there was an amazing energy that was felt before the door opened. It turned out to be a very nice place. Even looking at this room was very nice. It was very warm and cozy in there. There was a fireplace in this room. The girl began to look around and drew little conclusions. That it was definitely someone's room, for there was a bed, and everything was very neat, which created a cozy and special atmosphere. One really didn't want to leave it, as it had been a few days before. In the bathroom, it's another place where she's comfortable and doesn't remember feeling threatened, and apparently that's what she needs. Perhaps Alfred felt that she must frequent such places, and so decided to show her the place. But what kind of room was this? The girl asked at once where they had come, and was anxious to hear him answer, for she felt better here than anywhere else she had been until now. To which he replied that it was his secret room, but the girl still didn't understand what that meant. But it seems that wasn't the most important thing. Afterwards, her husband told her that she was the first and only girl to be in that room in all that time, besides him, of course, and that he usually comes straight from the bedroom. And yet, what did he bring her here for? And did it really make sense? Because the girl still didn't understand what they were here for, especially since she had recently passed out. It turns out that he wants to help her, and has brought her here for a reason, as this is a special room, and no one is ever allowed to come in here. She can be safe here, and no matter what happens, even if someone wants it bad enough, no one comes in here, and only she and he are entitled to it. So he told her that maybe this is where she'd get a good night's sleep, and she wouldn't pass out again. The girl, when she heard this, was once again insanely grateful to him, for he had acted like a real man who cared for his girlfriend, and tried to do everything he could to make her feel better about herself. He had a very kind look in his eyes that said he was capable of doing a lot of things as long as his girlfriend didn't have any problems or fears. He offered her some rest, and promised her that she could rest assured she was safe here, and even he would not come in here without her permission, and someone else would never do so, because it was strictly forbidden. He left her in this room so she could finally get some rest, because that's what she really needs. She felt very good to feel his care. She felt very good, because her husband treated her like a real princess, and sometimes even better than that. When he looked at her, he saw that the girl was surprised, for she was sure he had brought her here for something else entirely. And when he asked her what she was thinking as they walked here, he didn't expect to hear that answer. The girl said she was sure he would take her to the dark place and leave her there until she was no longer afraid of him, to which he replied that he had not even had such thoughts, so she could go to rest, and asked her not to think about anything bad. Meanwhile, the next morning came. The girl finally felt that she had had a very good night's sleep, and felt just fine. Such a thing had not happened for a long time. The girl could not even dream of it, because even at home, she did not have such luxurious conditions, and no one had ever taken care of her. Apparently, the people who sent her to the animal kingdom don't even realize that she has a life here that all those people can't even dream of. They probably still think that either she died on the first day, or she's suffering a lot every day. But it turns out that's not the case. She had a loving husband, who created for her the best conditions that every girl dreams of. He came to her, and asked how she was feeling. He wished her good morning, and finally saw that she was truly happy, and there was no longer any fear in her eyes as there had been before. If the girl had originally known that she could truly fear nothing, she would have been the happiest long ago. But it's still good that in time, it did happen, and now she's truly grateful for everything he does for her. Evening came on, and apparently it was the only day that had passed without some unforeseen situation or moment when she felt uncomfortable. This time he stayed with her, and what was most surprising was that the girl didn't mind at all. She waited until he was asleep. But why would she do that? Was she up to something again? She decided to get out of bed for some reason, but in order to do so, she needed him not to see it. Why would she need to do something in secret from him? If she tried to run away again, it would be the biggest disappointment. So that leaves hope that she just wanted a drink of water or something like that. The girl walked up to him and tried to make it as quiet as possible, but she doesn't even realize that even at that moment, he was controlling everything. When suddenly he took her hand, and it was really very unexpected, for she was sure that at this moment he was surely asleep and could hear nothing. And yet, why would she get out of bed and go somewhere in the middle of the night, and do it without him noticing it? Because a lot depends on it. Why, he decided to ask her one very important question, which apparently she didn't really want to answer. He asked why she was awake at this hour, and where she was going to go, to which she replied that she had been sleeping in his bed the whole time, and would not want her to make him uncomfortable because of it, and he had to sleep in the chair. To which Alfred replied that he would never think badly of her, and there was no problem for him in putting up with some inconvenience for a while for the sake of making his wife feel comfortable. To which the girl replied that she couldn't afford to sleep in her husband's bed all the time, because in her opinion, it wasn't very right. Apparently the girl is just not used to the fact that there is nothing wrong with someone taking care of her, especially if it's her husband, because it's customary for a man to do everything possible to make his woman happy, and that doesn't mean that in these situations a girl is being disrespectful or insolent to a man. It's just showing respect and caring, and if it's not there, it's bad. So she's going to have to get used to someone taking care of her, because all her life she grew up in an environment where that never happened. But really, it's perfectly normal for a man to try to make his woman happy for no particular reason. But he didn't seem to like the situation. He even said that apparently it couldn't be changed. But since she didn't want to disappoint him and show him that he'd failed once again, she wanted to fix it somehow. But she didn't know how yet, when suddenly Alfred decided not to give up, and came up with something new. He offered her something she couldn't have expected. He offered her to sleep in the same bed this time. But it seems it was a very big risk. But will the girl refuse it? Because if she does, it could ruin their relationship forever. And as he is her husband, it is not strange that he should venture to suggest it. And it was not too impertinent on his part, for he has a right to do so. He was anxious to hear from her, for it would be clear at once whether she had changed even a little, and whether there were any results, and whether his efforts had been successful. Strangely enough, she took a long time to think about what to answer him, because she realized if she made the wrong choice now, it could have very bad consequences. So she needed to think very carefully before giving him any kind of answer. But she can also be understood in this situation, because how can you easily agree to such a proposal, even despite all the good things that happened between them? Because once, these monsters destroyed a lot of people, and among them was her mother. Every time she recalls it, she hates them, and it was incredibly difficult for her to agree to this proposal. But at the same time, the girl understood that she had the only chance to make the right choice. At this point, because of how long it took her to answer him, she felt very uncomfortable, because she didn't want to keep him waiting, or have him think she didn't want him to. She just needed time to think it over and not be rushed. She still doesn't understand why she reacts like that. She knows he won't hurt her. Maybe it's just a habit. How suddenly, when she still hadn't answered his question, he, for some reason, decided to say something. And maybe it was so she wouldn't have to agree if she didn't want to. He said it was just a joke, but whether it was actually true remains unknown. Most likely he just decided not to scare her and not to make her make such a difficult choice. But the girl did not expect that, and had already accepted the fact that she would have to answer this very difficult question, to which she most likely wanted to give a negative answer. And since her husband realized it, he decided to make the choice easier for her, which once again proves that even now, he's doing what's best. So he just suggested she go to bed, because it was really late. For sure he realizes that she just needs some time, and at some point, they won't have these situations or any problems anymore. As he went to bed, she began to speculate as to why he hadn't waited for an answer, and said it was only a joke. Perhaps she would finally realize that he was even now trying to free her from a difficult choice she didn't want to make, and that he understood perfectly well what she was really thinking and didn't want to agree to it at all. He turned out to be really very wise and caring, though unfortunately she still can't get used to it. At some point she even felt sorry for him, because he's trying to do what's best, and the girl doesn't see him as someone she can trust. She was beginning to feel guilty, and had already regretted many times that she had kept him waiting, and made it look as if he had realized everything, that she was still not ready to trust him completely, and to consider in him a man with whom she could be happy. But at the same time, perhaps there is nothing wrong with that, because what kind of person can easily trust someone about whom she has heard only horror stories all her life? Besides, she is alone here, and she is defenseless, so she has to think many times before answering a question or agreeing to something. Now she was finally beginning to realize that if she had any thoughts of running away from here, first of all, there was no way she could do it. Secondly, if anyone noticed, she would regret it very much. And thirdly, even if she did, she had nowhere to go. She had been thinking all night about how she should behave and what she really wanted, for the moment had come when she had to decide for herself whether she could trust him and whether she wanted to stay here forever. The next day came. The girl went to some office and decided to read some book. Did she really want to learn something to make some important decision on which her future would depend? Afterwards, her assistant came up to her and offered to make tea for her, but the girl thanked her for the offer and said it wasn't necessary. She seems to have guilt now, which she can only fix by apologizing to him and doing things to let him know that things will be different now, and she's willing to work to improve their relationship as well. But all she could think of for the moment was that she had better not be in this room at all. Could she never be able to trust him? Or would it take years? But then Alfred might not be able to stand it, and might change his mind about marrying her. After all, what for him such a girl who does not trust him and tries in every possible way to avoid communication and being near him? Because this is really abnormal, while he has not done a single act because of which she could think something bad about him. On the contrary, he is trying to do everything possible so that she was sure in him and did not doubt that she is safe. So she decided not to go back to that room that night, and instead went to her own room. Although it's very strange because she only gets a good night's sleep in places she doesn't want to go back to. Her actions are sometimes completely illogical, and her fear in every situation is really unjustified. The girl is constantly trying to come up with a non-existent outcome that makes her afraid of something that can't actually happen. And she knows it. Well then why and for what she does it? Does she just like it when someone feels guilty? And in this situation it's Alfred? But he doesn't deserve to be treated like that. And even though he's a monster, he doesn't do things like he does that most of the people she's lived with don't do. She's only intimidated by his appearance. But is that why she's still not used to it? And the fact that she went to her room on the contrary made it even worse. Her husband will now definitely be sure that she's not comfortable being in the same room with him, even if it's much safer than any other option. In her room, it was very difficult for her to fall asleep, but she tried to do it. She did it with all her might, but she still did not want to go back to where her husband was waiting for her. Apparently, it was a matter of principle for her. She makes herself worse, and has not yet realized that it is necessary to change something, because in this way, it will not get better. And on the contrary, in their relationship may appear problems that are actually very easy to fix. But for some reason, she doesn't even try to do anything to make everyone feel better. Apparently, the girl is sure that only for her someone should do everything, and she in response can only hide and pretend that everything is happening against her. She hasn't had a single thought that maybe, in order to make her life a little better, she should take the initiative sometimes, or at least ask him to spare some time and talk about important topics, because if you keep silent and hide, it won't fix anything. But on the contrary, it can worsen the situation, which as a result will be very hard to fix. And there were so many good moments that were perfect for starting a happy and good relationship that will bring them both good emotions and joy. But instead, she lay in her room all night thinking it would do her some good. And then morning came. It was time for breakfast, and she never got a good night's sleep, though she had a great opportunity to get a good night's rest without making any mistakes that she would regret, as she did this time. The girl is sure that if he sees her like this, he will not only ask her why she slept in her room, but he might get angry, because she feels bad again because of her own fault. When she inquired why he was absent for a long time, the assistant replied that she had forgotten to tell her something, for in fact, he had asked her to tell his wife that he had urgent business outside the palace, so he had to skip breakfast and go away on business. When the girl found out about it, it was very unusual for her to be alone, and afterward thanked her for the information. She'd never thought he could have the kind of business that would cause him to skip breakfast and go somewhere early in the morning. And since this was the first time it had happened in all the time she'd been here, she was just now finding it out. Meanwhile, the food had already been brought out for her. It looked very appetizing as always, and of course it tasted incredibly delicious. The girl is surprised every time how much the cook is good at his job. So, she does not miss a single meal, because every time, the food seems to taste better and better. She's sitting alone at the table, so she's had a good opportunity to reflect on what happened. And if a miracle happens, she'll realize her mistakes and decide to finally make amends after all this time. When suddenly, she made one very unusual decision. She somehow thought that if she now went to rest in his room, he would not notice that when he woke up, she was not there at all. But she really hoped so. Because how could he not notice that she hadn't been around all this time? And what would happen as a result, she didn't know. But she hoped it would make things better. But the best part is that something she sees there will surprise her a lot, but she doesn't know it yet. She opens the door to this room, and she thinks she's going to make up for her mistake. But as it turns out, she didn't follow through with her plan. And as a result, it didn't work out the way she planned. The thing is, some very unforeseen circumstances happened, and something the girl just didn't know about. So, it didn't work out for her. It turned out that when she went into that room she was not alone. But what could have gone wrong? For Alfred had been away since the morning, and she thought she was sure to do well. But she was mistaken. The thing is, it turns out he's been coming for a while, but for some reason no one noticed or knew it. As soon as she entered the room, she heard his voice. He asked why she had come. For all this time she had tried to avoid him, and now she had come into the room herself. Apparently he wasn't entirely happy with the way she'd treated him, so he didn't understand what made her come back after she'd already made her choice. He of course tried not to show that he was very offended that the girl was even willing to be in that room, where she was very scared, just so she wouldn't have to sleep in the same room with him. Especially after what he'd done for her, it was very frustrating for him to realize that, because he's always trying to make things better, and she still avoids him. It seems like he has no options left to fix this girl. Maybe he didn't even think it would be this difficult with her. And even after a long time, they won't even be able to talk about a topic that still remains put off for now. But in order to somehow justify her act, the girl as usual decided to say something that will definitely not make him angry. But at the same time, it was not true. It seems that at some point very soon, he will just change his mind, and he will get tired of unrequitedly trying to improve the relationship, while it doesn't even work. It turns out that the girl explained that she had retired to her room to give him a chance to sleep and rest on her bed after being forced to sleep on an uncomfortable chair. And it really seemed to work. Those words sounded really believable. Plus, she was able to make it look like she wanted to take care of him and did it for him. And it was especially important to him before his morning chores, because if he didn't get enough sleep, he wouldn't feel well. Now he mistakenly thinks that it was finally a situation where she wanted to do something nice for him, and it was very obvious that he was very happy about it, because he didn't expect her to be able to do that. As suddenly, he decided to start one very important conversation again, and said that they should do things a little differently this time, which should at least improve a little and correct their mistakes. It was the first time he had ever said one very important phrase to her, for this was something he had definitely realized all along, and he had only now decided to tell her what he had learned a long time ago. Alfred told the girl that he has long known what she was afraid to tell him, that she is very afraid of people like him, and only because of this they do not work out. Their relationship does not develop in any way, and it is very difficult to improve, because she constantly avoids him and does not talk to him about it. And afterwards he said that he had been thinking about it all the time a while ago, and maybe he had one option that could help them. And because of that, the girl would be able to feel much more comfortable, and still be able to get enough sleep. He suggested making the bed in this room a little bigger, so that there would be enough room for them, and the girl wouldn't feel uncomfortable. But it is not yet known what the girl thinks about it, and whether she will again fail to answer him or ignore his proposal, as is usually the case. The last bed would barely fit 2 people because it is designed for 1 person. So, he had gone out today to look for just the right bed that could fit them perfectly. It was clear to her now what he had been doing all this time, and what those things were. And even in this situation, when he had left her alone, it was only to do something good for her. But even if it doesn't help to improve their relationship, most likely, very soon there will come a point when he will just get tired of trying and spending all his time just to do something good for her. And it's not mutual. To make her feel a little more at ease, and to arrange everything in advance, he promised that he would not do anything that she might be afraid of, or anything that she might not like. So he said she could sleep well now, and really hoped that all his efforts had not been in vain, and she would appreciate his concern. When suddenly, a real miracle happened. The girl finally agreed to his proposal, although perhaps she was afraid to refuse, because she thought that this was her last chance. Otherwise, there could be bad consequences if she continued to behave in this way. Not every man could stand such a character, and would not want to continue to do something. The girl thought for some time that it was astonishing that in spite of his busyness, he had found time to find a suitable bed, to put it in the room, and this in spite of the fact that there was no certainty that she would agree at all. It's very interesting to know his thoughts on how he feels about this girl, and whether he's willing to wait for her to start trusting him, and stop being afraid after all. Although most likely he's already in the last stage, and if another situation like this happens where she doesn't trust him, he just won't be able to stand it and might change his mind. He might be thinking about giving up trying and finding a new girl. But as it turned out, this time the girl felt much calmer, and was even surprised that she didn't have any excitement around him. Meanwhile, the next morning came, and the girl woke up to the fact that something was wrong. She felt someone's touch, which was unusual for her. But as it turned out, there was a very unusual situation. When they slept, Alfred accidentally began to hug her, and in the morning, the girl felt it, and immediately woke up. She certainly didn't expect that, though she realized that he hadn't done it on purpose. Maybe he just wasn't in control of himself in the dream, and because of that, the situation had happened. And in this position she lay for some time longer. It was so unfamiliar to her. but at the same time she did not want to wake him up. She certainly had the urge to get out of his arms, but to avoid making another mistake, and to make sure he didn't think she was against it in any way, she decided to just wait until he finally woke up. She tried not to make any unnecessary movements that might wake him up, for she realized that if he didn't rest enough, it wouldn't be very good. She was tired of lying still and wanted to get out of bed as soon as possible, but unfortunately she had no choice but to wait as long as it took. From the outside, it looked quite nice. It's very interesting to see Alfred's reaction, who will notice that he was hugging the girl the whole time, and also whether he will pretend that nothing happened, because most likely the girl will also pretend that she was just asleep and didn't notice it.